So yes, I understand what you mean about that. The that the It's actually a concept. The concept that everything is anicca, and the concept that everything is in fact not self. That there's no permanent self. These concepts are intellectually satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
That they just seem to be more correct than, let us say, Christianity, which is really not so easy for even a child to swallow, but it's very rarely that an adult can be talked into the Christian story,
Mm.
especially about the Trinity, three in one. I thought three in one, by the way, was shoe polish. But that the concepts that you're talking about um, are intellectually satisfying from the beginning
Mm-hmm.
for those who, let us say, are kind of ready for the Dhamma, because most children throughout the world, especially if they're raised in any kind of religious environment, religion, it goes. I would go so far as to say that religion is nothing but formalized magic. And so we teach our children magical beliefs.
Mm.
And one of the most magical beliefs is that I am.
Mm.
And, and we tell the children this: I am, in the sense that, oh, you're special, or God loves you. You know, these are the kinds of things that make each child kind of feel special, but not in it, both in a good way and in the bad way. Because if we are taught that we are special, we still feel like victims. So we don't really buy into the story that we're special,
Mm.
that we don't meet up to mom's expectations of me being special. And that can be either mild and something that can be dealt with through insight and Anapanasati practice, or it can get so severe that it gets you into the White House or prison, and maybe
Mm.
both of them. um, in the sense of, am I good enough, Daddy?
Mm.
And that at the worst case is quite narcissistic, to where the narcissist will go way out of his way to show that he's up to scratch, because down deep inside he feels inadequate. It depends upon how deep. Mostly it's so deep that the narcissist would never uncover it. He never digs that deep.
Mm.
And so he's trying to, but that's another way of looking at it. If you want to go off into that, I think that you had more than to talk about in this intellectualization of anatta.
Well, I suppose what I'm interested in, I feel like there are. So as I said, I've always found the ideas intellectually very satisfying, and I found that they are the concepts that most adequately reflect my experience of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose it's the question I want to ask is it's you know, my understanding of the path is that through a kind of very deep experiential insight into these ideas, we become free. You know, once there's a kind of certain depth to one's insight into non-self, you can no longer be as imprisoned in the fabrication of the self in a way that keeps one in suffering.
I
Would you say?
agree,
Okay.
but there's more to say about it. But go ahead.
So my question is really, you know, I, you know, on a in my sitting practice at the moment, which I'm enjoying immensely, there will be the sort of conditionality of aspects of the self. It's becoming very clear. The way the tetrads work, the way it goes from body to feelings to mind. It's so brilliant because you really become aware of how the feelings are conditioned by the body, and then how the mind is conditioned by the feelings, and so you're really seeing how the self is not one cohesive thing. You're seeing how it is a sort of web of related processes.
Precisely, yes.
And it's satisfying to see that, and it's also very powerful and liberating, because you become aware. You don't. I think it makes me feel like I don't have to be a victim to my thoughts, because my thoughts are conditioned by my feelings, and I can work with my feelings. And you become aware through the process that actually it's not some fixed eternal thing, the self. It's something that you can work with, gently, compassionately, but also quite determinately. Is that a word? And one's experience can improve, and that's wonderful. And then there's sort of other insights that come up along the way, just off the top of my head, like seeing, in the mind, and you see how one part of the mind seems to perform for another part of the mind, and you become aware of, the sort of lack of cohesion and the lack of unity that kind of exists within the self. I don't know if that makes sense. So anyway, the question is, these sort of small I insights, how do they turn into big I insights? Is it like a kind of cumulative effect of them? Is it a question of the regularity with which one experiences them? Is it a question of the depth through which one experiences them? So that's sort of one question. And then the second question is, how does one practice the fourth tetrad in such a way that it allows these insights to come to fruition?
All right. Let's start with this. I think that it's a mistake that most Westerners make, that they're looking for really, really big insights. And that perhaps a better way of looking at it is through the concept of sati, is that we have to keep having the same little insight over and over and over again. And as it does, it goes in to the depths.
Okay, that makes sense, actually.
But we need to repeat it over and over again. And the reason that we do is because the neural network is such that the old habits are quite stubborn. And so we need to keep seeing things in a new way over and over and over again, until eventually it's almost like that. I've seen this sometimes. In fact, I know of several places where it actually occurs, that the old road that people are using is such a muddy pit that they stop even trying to drive on the road, and they drive beside the road. Because they're driving beside the road, the new road that they're making becomes the predominant way of transportation, and the old road is kind of forgotten. Because it's seen as bad and old and dangerous and whatnot like that, and so people don't even bother to use the old road anymore. Guess what happens? Plants come, and it begins to overgrow, and 10 years or more from now, you might want to go back and use that road, because the new one that we've been making is now worn out. But in this regard of what we're doing with the mind is that we're making new wholesome pathways, and we do that by remembering to have the right effort. In fact, that part of the Eightfold Noble Path Normally, what they look at from the beginning student or the ordinary Buddhist, or even childhood, is that they work for Sila Samadhi Panya, in the sense of you've got to start behaving yourself and behave because you're able to remember to behave yourself. That eventually slowly starts to change the mind.
Mm.
But that's actually not necessarily the way to go, because it can happen that people can be really, really well behaved and still they're a mess inside. That in fact they are perfectly well behaved, but they resent it.
Mm.
Or that they feel that that wasn't enough, but they don't know what to do next. It can actually get so formalized that there are certain sects, even of Buddhism, is that their behavior as a monk is so important that they never get around to doing much of anything else. That your behavior has to be absolutely perfect. All right. So, in the noble way of looking at it, that actually we start with wisdom, we start with the insight. And with that insight, with the wisdom, we begin to see the nature of the mind, and we begin to modify the mind so that we become comfortable and happy, and the mind becomes noble, so that our behavior then reflects the state of mind that we're in. So rather than putting ourselves into a straitjacket of
Mm.
behavior, hoping that the mind is going to change, is not the right way to go. And yet that's the way that all religions teach. They go, they would go so far as to say, well, you got to teach the kids the rules because they're not wise enough to figure them out for themselves. And that can get really formalized when you make the father responsible for the child's behavior, because now he's going to exercise, let us say, extra and unwanted authority, where the child may grow up to where he's really well behaved, but he's still miserable.
Mm.
That in fact, the ones who are suicidal or eat themselves alive with disease or whatever like that are generally very, very well behaved people. And everybody says, oh, well, God took the very best. Well, you don't know what kind of turmoil these kids are on the inside. We only know that they're proving that they're really good kids because they've got excellent behavior.
Mm.
But by going through it the other direction, by going to it through wisdom first. So basically, we look at it as Sila Samatipanya, in the sense that if you can get yourself secluded, if you can get yourself away from the world, so that you're sitting with your eyes closed and your legs crossed and your arms folded, at that point in time, your behavior is actually quite good. So the distinction is not between whether you start with good behavior or not, it's the time frame. In the sense that now we're looking at that our behavior is wonderful simply because we shut down and we shut up. And our and if we can shut up on the inside as well as on the outside, now our sila is perfect.
Mm.
And then, in fact, you could also say that getting the mind quiet, or getting it into a state where it's fit for work, fit for application, that would be the samadhi. That would be the purification of the mind, because now the mind is free from the hindrances as well as free from bad behavior, leaving us to the third stage, which would then be purification of view. And this first purification of view, that this is actually now what we're really working with. That's the insight. The
Mm.
insight into the nature of reality is anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca means everything is in flux, including whoever I thought I was.
Mm.
Everything is in flux. But that with a self, there is something to suffer. If there is no self, then there is no suffering, because there's nothing to suffer. And that's an insight. That's really a deep one, to recognize that dukkha and anatta are directly related. It's almost like a fork in the road. That when anicca comes up, we can either take the self and the suffering, or we can take the anatta, which is not suffering. But normally we go for suffering, so we could say anicca, dukkha, anatta, because that's the normal way that things happen in the big way. Is eventually we come to understand that just because things change don't mean that the mind has to become disturbed about it, because that disturbance is actually the quality of self also. But here's something that's really important on that point, and that is that the word anatta or atta is a word that comes from the old Indo-European language, that is not the modern Greek of atom in the sense of atom or not cuttable, but rather it comes from the word ATMO rather than ATOM. That word is the word that gives us atmosphere. And you can see it in the spelling of the word Mahatma, ma, with the hot ma. So that's the way to look at it. And this is anatta. It's just M's and N's get confused sometimes.
So that suggests that this initial Indo-European concept, which turned into the idea of a kind of fixed self, was actually initially potentially more fluid, because the atmosphere obviously suggests something coming together and dispersing again.
Yes, as opposed to something that is normally thought of in the West as a soul, an eternal soul. That in fact, the teaching of anatta is the teaching that there is no soul, so it should have been translated instead of no self. They should have actually translated as no soul. I think that the reason that they did that was because the original translators were still Christian. And that was just a bridge too far for them to go. And so they chose to translate it as no self rather than no soul. By doing that, that really slams the lid on the coffin and puts all the nails in place. There is no soul. When we get it like that, then we can understand it much more easily about the concept of no self, because what we mean is no permanent self. Now, there's another kind of permanent self, and that would be the kind of self that the atheist has, which means upon the breakup of the body, the existing being is annihilated. I think I got the phraseology right. All right. But that's annihilationism. That means that the self is not eternal, but it's permanent until it's annihilated. To where within the Buddhist concept, it is, oh no, there it comes, here it comes, and there it goes. It can last a little while, or it can, and then sometimes people get stuck into it over and over and over and over again. So perhaps a better way of thinking about it is selfish rather than a self. Anatta means not selfish. A clear example of that would be if your brother or someone close to you comes and wants to borrow, a small but substantial amount of money, say $500. If you say no, then the answer would be, no, I can't do it because I need that money. That's selfishness right there. Or I can't because I don't have it. Rather than, oh, let's see what we can do to get it for you. Including, if I've got it, I'll give it. Now, if I can give it, that means that I'm coming out of self into taking care of my brother. He's happy and I'm happy. But if I say, no, you cannot have the loan because I need it, that's being selfish.
I've the last few months, there's been plenty of opportunities where I've seen I've seen suffering directly arise in response to selfish impulses. And I feel it there's been a few times where I can actually sort of feel it in the body, like a constriction around my sort of solar plexus area. And it's like the constriction of the self going, I want it. I want something. I don't want someone to take this thing away from me,
Mm-hmm.
And I see immediately there's suffering that directly comes from selfishness, and that selfishness comes from a sense of self, which is fabricated. So you're suggesting that the way that this then becomes the place from which one lives and acts, that happens through the mechanism of sati. It is sati that enables that insight to come in again and again and again and again, and that clears the new road.
Especially if the sati also is incorporating with taking a deep breath, so that we can put the right part of the mind into operation, rather than letting the reptilian mind run the show.
It's also it's interesting, the breath and Anapanasati and the way that relates to sati off the cushion. It's like as soon as there's a sati kicks in and there's like a conscious breath, it's like the breath is a anchor for the whole kind of.
I think you got that from me, but go ahead.
I probably did, but like the breath as an anchor to the entire meditative state. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's sort of the genius of Anapanasati is that it's an anchor to that whole process of feeling joy, to the whole process of letting go, to the whole process, all of what it is, it suddenly is available when the breath is available. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So let's go back to that point about the selfish, just to make one point. That if you don't give your brother the money that he wants to borrow, or you work it out somehow, then both are feeling disappointed. Both are in dukkha. But if we can figure it out so that everybody is in a win-win situation. Now, generally at this point, we need to look at, this is actually in the sutta number 2, Sabha Asava, all of the taints, to where the first 3 taints are taken care of by verse number 11. The first 3 taints, which is the self, the sila bhatta paramasa, are attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, and then the third one is doubt about what is and what is not the path. So once we take care of those things, intellectually, we begin to operate in a different way. We begin to see things in a new way. And so now we go to let us say the asava, or those things that can be developed by using. All right. So the first 3 are developed through knowledge, through insight, through seeing directly, by wise attention, being attentive to things. But this next group is talking about how to become free by using things. And this comes in with the 4 requisites. And the 4 requisites are just enough food, just enough clothing, just enough shelter, and just enough medicine. In other words, what we're talking about is a basic bottom line about how we can live our lives, making sure that, for instance, if you go below the line on any one of those things, there's going to be definitely suffering. And so wisdom would say just keep above that bottom line. For instance, for you, living under a tree in Canada may be too much. but maybe living under the tree in Thailand, not so bad. But living in a hut in Thailand, that's even better. Or living in a hut that's well done in even northern Canada. All right, but the hut that's needed in Thailand is not the same kind of hut that's needed in Canada. But we're still looking at what would be the basics so that in this environment or in this situation that I am, what is enough? Because most of the people in the West are either well above their minimum and they still suffer, or they're actually below the minimum. Many people don't get adequate medical attention. Many people don't have enough food. Many people are homeless. Generally, when you're homeless and you don't have enough food to eat, your clothing is also pretty ratty. And so there's a whole lot of people who live below their own bottom line, and living below that bottom line causes undue hardship and suffering. So if we can make it above our own bottom line, that's all we need. Everything else is gravy above that. I guess you could talk about it as the bottom line would be like the surface of water. Yeah, you can go pretty deep into really heavy-duty bad things by being without, but if you can come up to your bottom line, that's the surface. Once you come to the surface, you don't have to climb into the sky. You've got all the air you need. And so we kind of find that bottom line. Once we get that bottom line, intellectually, or let us say through wisdom, we create for ourselves what our own bottom line is going to be. And you know that if you go below that, that it's going to cause you hardship that you don't need to endure if you can keep it that way. After that, like I said, everything is gravy, which means now if the brother comes in and borrows $500, sure, give it to him, because I'm going to have enough money once I've gotten just the bottom line, and that's all I care about. I don't have to say, well, I've got $1,500 in the bank, and if I give him $500, I'm down to $1,000. Well, that may be above the bottom line. So let's find out what the bottom line is for ourselves. And what happens is that as you mature in the Dhamma, the bottom line goes down so that you're willing to tolerate more and more, while your wisdom goes up, which means that you get yourself into a successful life more and more easily.
I think that's interesting. The requisites there, they obviously relate to belief in rites and rituals, don't they? Because I think a lot of people spend so much time and attention on their status, their employment, their career progression, and it's not actually because they necessarily care that much about money or wealth. It's because of the sense of rites and rituals. It's because of the sense of
they should
do these things, and also the sense of self, because it's like, unless I'm progressing in my career, I don't feel validated as a human being, therefore I need to do that.
So if we can work on that validation as a human being so that you become validated, then you don't need something on the outside. That in fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa points this out in the book on the prison of life, is that he talks about that one of the instincts, and I can see exactly where he comes from. He just mentioned that it's an instinct, but the instinct that he was talking about is showing off, preening, bragging, pride, all of that kind of stuff is actually comes right out of instinct. We know that it does because look how many animals do it. The peacock with all of their feathers and puffing oneself up.
Yeah.
And so you can see this mechanism that is part of the
Chest.
yes, exactly. That is the self-preservation instinct.
Mm.
And in that regard, they actually did name it right. A more correct way of saying it would be the organism preservation instinct. But with ignorance, it becomes the self-preservation instinct, puffing ourselves up and being big and important and all of that, because deep down inside we feel insecure. So, how can we actually feel secure? Because if we actually feel secure, then we don't have to puff ourselves up with pride. I have actually heard about that real strength can be quite gentle. That when someone is trying to be strong, they're not gentle. But when someone is truly strong, then they can be gentle.
Mm.
That they don't have to prove their strength. So if I disapprove of something that Kitty's doing, I can tease her about it very gently, rather than nag her about it the way that an ordinary parent would. In other words, how are we going to deal with the child's bad behavior? The answer is joyfully.
Mm. Do you know what? You said something to me in our last chat, or a couple of chats ago, maybe, which has really stuck with me. At the time, it's interesting, it's often the way when we're learning something in a powerful way. At the time, I felt it quite harshly, what you said. We were talking about anger and how, and I was sort of, I think I made the point that, you know, as a parent, can we use anger skillfully to show a child that their behavior is not correct? And I think the language I used was, you know, you're making me cross now. And you said, why would you tell your child such a vicious lie? And then when you said it, I felt it quite harshly. I was like, oh, that's quite hard. But
it got through, didn't it?
It got through. And actually, now, whenever there's a sense when I'm with my children, and I think it's so interesting. Child rearing is such an astonishing process, and it's one which either I feel like it can entrench so much negative habit and pattern, or it can free so much negative habit and pattern. But anyway, that particular bit of advice or teaching you gave, since then, whenever I notice any resentment, anger arising in me when I'm with my kids, especially in response to a behavior of theirs, it's like another anchor for like Sati to come in, for me to kind of clear it. And it's that thinking of like, what am I teaching my child to do? Am I teaching my child to behave a certain way? Or am I teaching my child to be happy and to respond to life in a kind of happy, skillful way? And a lot of it's the rites and rituals. You often see parents being really crummy parents in public, and it's because they're scared of the judgment of other people. So they're parenting their child in a fearful response to how other people are perceiving them in their role as a parent. And it's obviously such bullshit. But yeah, thank you for that. Since then, I'm really being aware of just like that, and suddenly it's so easy. It's so easy to help them out of a bad mood and help them out of a bad feeling through laughter and through smiling and through fun. And then once they're out of it, you can discuss. You can be like, oh, when you took that from Sid, how did you feel? Like, it wasn't nice to feel that selfish. It wasn't nice to snatch that. It wasn't nice for you when you hit Sid. And it wasn't like, do you know what I mean? So like, you deal with it once you've brought them out of the bad feeling, rather than kind of negatively latch onto the bad feeling with a bad feeling of your own. And suddenly, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, now here's a question for you.
Mm.
You as a parent, did you take a university course in parenting?
No, I did not.
Where did you learn? Sorry about that.
Yes.
Kitty, come. Come say hello to Matt.
Hello.
Hi, Kitty. How are you doing? Are you good? You can't hear me. Hi, Kitty. How are you? Are you all right?
Yeah.
Good. Good. I'm Matt. It's nice to see you. How old are you,
Okay.
Kitty? How old are you?
Okay.
Okay. Alrighty. So you paitiao, huh?
Yes.
Alrighty. She's going to go to town.
Okay. Bye, Kitty.
So back to the question. Where did you learn how to do parenting?
Well, I mean, very unconsciously, you learn it as a child from the parenting you receive.
Precisely. All
But
right.
this, in my particular case, this is exactly the type of parenting that I don't want to be
All right.
reproducing.
Where do you think your mom and dad learned parenting?
They learnt it from how they were parented.
Uh-huh. And how about grandpa and grandma? Where did they learn?
It keeps going.
All right. So it's not a good idea to blame mom and pop for the problems that I've got
No.
now because it just goes on back that nobody ever really learned how. And then not only that, but I know that in the United States there are many different places where the person, in order to get a particular kind of job, has to go through a training program, especially around kids, like primary school education and all of that kind of stuff, except that this part of it is never taught to them.
Mm.
That much of what a first grade teacher's job to do is to try to undo all the mess that's already been done to the kids.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the first grade teachers are not taught. They're taught how to teach children, but not how to care for them.
Mm.
And so it's perpetuated after the kid gets into school, and the whole society winds up screwing up every child that's born, with very, very few exceptions.
Mm.
So we can't say that, well, my mom and my dad did it like that. In fact, there's a pretty funny joke about the psychologist and the client are working together and putting things together, and they find that, that the reason this man is an asshole is because when he was 4 years old, his mom gave him a spanking.
Mm.
And that's as far as they go, blaming it on mom. You know, they call that archaeology, psychological archaeology.
Mm.
What they failed to uncover was the reason that he got the spanking from his mom was because he was acting like an asshole. And mom didn't know how to manage 4-year-old assholes. She'd been managing them the way that she'd like to have managed them when she was a kid and they were adults. And so it just goes round and round and round. This is what we mean by samsara. This is one of the definitions, is every generation screws up the next generation. But over time, slowly, slowly, we're beginning to wake up out of that. And pretty soon, children will be raised better than they are now. But you and I won't be around then.
That's a very hopeful tone that you're finding.
Well, one mind moment at a time, one
Mm.
moment of sati at a time. Learning to train your kids to be joyful so that you don't give them, especially the vicious lie of saying, your behavior made me angry. That's not true. You've been getting angry long before the kid came along. No, the kids can't make daddy angry. Only daddy can mess up the kids by transmitting that anger to them, so that they say, well, how should I behave when I'm around these kids that are misbehaving? The answer is, oh, I'm going to behave towards them the way that my daddy behaved towards me. And so this is where the parenting changes. And in an important kind of way, what really is going on is not that you're learning to be a different kind of parent to your children. You're learning how to be a different kind of parent to your own child within. How would you like to be treated as a child when you're misbehaving?
That's it, isn't it? It's like the ability to have a smile and be patient and be compassionate to your own bad moods, to your own difficult feelings. If you can't do that for yourself, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to do it for someone else.
Well, now the Buddha had his own language for this, but this has been, in fact, you could say that this is one of the big gifts that Freud has given when he talked about the ego, the superego, and the id. They're a little complicated when used in that kind of language, but Burns simplified things quite a bit by naming it parent, adult, and child. And so it's this parent that we have within that is actually imitating the parenting that you got when you were a kid, including all the woulds, shoulds, etc., like that we are now using the word of Satipattana Paramasa. When we were kids, we became attached to the way things are supposed to be done, and Daddy is proving that this is the way that it's supposed to be done. When I screw up, I get smacked. That's the way that things should be done. And so we go around smacking everything that we don't like. And so we need to learn how to reparent ourselves. And that then becomes the insight over and over again. And in this case, what we're meaning by the insight is that which can see rather than blindly behave. That's the adult. That's that frontal cortex. That's what we need the air for, is so we can get enough brain juice going, enough fire in the frontal cortex to really see what's going on. This is why we incorporate the Anapanasati, the breathing, to remember to breathe, to remember to wake up, to remember to see what's happening now, rather than behaving according to a flight plan that was filed when we were children. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to sort of shovel Grandpa over into the corner so that the adult and the child now have freedom. The freedom literally is freedom from all that we were trained. There is a song in the movie with Chris Christopherson and Barbara Streisand, "The Star Is Born." And the name of the song is "Watch Closely Now," which is quite brilliant. But in there is a line that says that I am the master magician who has set you free from the lies that you've been told. And so that's what really the magic of the Dhamma is because it's going to set you free from all the lies that you've been told. All of the Satipattana Paramasa, all of the rites, rules, and rituals. And one of the lies that you've been told is that parents get angry because their kid makes them angry. You learned that as a lie when you were a kid, and you were repeating that lie to your kids, right? So our job then is to free ourselves from the lies that we've been told. That's wonderful. I just love that line. To be free from the lies that we've been told, because we recognize that, wait a minute, almost everything that I was ever told was a lie.
And then they're internalized, aren't they? And we keep telling ourselves those lies, and that's how they keep their strength and their power and their imprisoning quality.
All the couldas, wouldas, shouldas, all of the aspirations of what you're going to be when you grow up. Oh, don't do that, do this. Don't become a nurse, become a doctor. You know, all of those kinds of things. That we're not at whatever the kid wants to do for himself is not good enough. Oh, you cannot be a pyrotechnic expert. You've got to become an engineer instead. But I don't want my son or my grandson blowing himself up, you know, and let the kid do what he wants to do. I would much rather have a pyrotechnic, happy grandson than a miserable bridge builder. And so we become free from the lies that we've been told only by remembering over and over and over again that I do not have to listen to the way that I've been trained. I don't have to listen to the way things are. I can look to see what's right to do right now. That's the wisdom. And that's the figuring out. And you can think of that as the word insight. But if you look at the word vipassana in a strange way, you can see that what it really talking about is that the word pas or pasa has to do with the same way that we use it nowadays. I don't know why the translators translated into really highfalutin language like tranquility. But basically the word is just be passive. Another way of thinking about it is let all of that stuff just pass you by. And that insight comes from watching things as they pass by, which is anicca. And we just watch things as they pass by. That's the insight, is the watching. And sometimes we see some things pretty spectacular. Like, wow, look at that one. I remember, in fact, one time that I had, not getting into too much detail, but I had gotten into competition with someone that I thought would have been capable of seeing me as an equal, but he put me down. And so I'm writing emails and getting emails back from him. And basically what I'm doing is I'm telling him I'm as good as he is. And when a third person who I'm sending these copies of these emails, she looks at it and she says, "You should shut your mouth." She's talking to me. Because she can see the conceit in there that I couldn't see when I'd written the email. But when she told me, I go back and I read the email and yes, dripping with conceit, dripping with competition. We're dripping with I'm as good as you are. And I reckon I don't have to do that. That in fact, now it's a good idea to start looking for that. To be mindful that when conceit comes up, when we feel like that we've got to compete with someone, sometimes I still catch myself writing emails to that same guy because I'm still trying to prove that I'm as good as he is. But when I catch it, I say, nope, out. That reminds me of an old joke that comes from the where I was studying psychology at the University of Michigan. They put this big maze up, you know, because they'd studied rats until they were tired of it. So they made a human-sized rat maze, the same dimensions, but at a human scale. Only instead of putting a piece of cheese, they put a $5 bill. And so they did all of their experiments, but when they took the thing down, what they found out was that students were still breaking into the lab trying to find another $5 bill.
The rats didn't do that, did they?
That we still think that we're in a rat maze looking for a $5 bill. That's what we do. We train ourselves that way rather than recognizing that, no, times have changed. Things are different now. We have to get up to this present moment. That there may have been a maze with a $5 bill, but now that's a lie in my own mind. That the $5 bill is still there. And so this is a way of looking at it, is that you go to that rat maze to get your $5 bill every time your child gets angry or does something. And so you say, you made me angry. That's going back and going through that same old maze again and coming up with looking for the $5 bill. This is the way that the mind works.
It's an empty promise, isn't it? It's an empty threat, and the maze is constructed, and we have to choose, because obviously the way the mind works, we need constructs to a certain extent. There's a question of do we choose the constructs which will make us happy, or do we choose the constructs which will make us miserable?
Right. And so what we then begin to understand more and more is the entire world is based upon that bait and switch. That you're not ever going to get what the world promises you. A clear example of that is the chick magnet or the pocket rocket that the man buys, or the big motorcycle at the age of 40 or 45. He's going through a midlife crisis. He did everything he was told to do. You go to school, he went to school. You go to this school, you go to that school. He went to this school and that school. He got that program, he got that PhD, or he got that degree, and then he got that job, and then he got that house, and maybe he got the trophy wife, and he is still dissatisfied. Where in all of that is the satisfaction coming from? Because that was the promise that's never kept. That you will get eventually rewarded for all of your hard work. And you never get rewarded.
It's the it's sort of the externality of it all, isn't it? It's the promise that it's something from outside will make you happy. If you do this thing at this place, you will be happy. If you get, I feel like what the kind of training of Anapanasati is doing, it's showing you that joy and that happiness and those good feelings are internally generated. And then that frees you from the need for the external.
Precisely. Now, in these Satipattana, the Pali that is divided in is Kaya Nupassana, Vedana Nupassana, Chitta Nupassana, and Dhamma Nupassana. And in the Satipattana Sutta, the Dhamma Nupassana is discussed completely differently than it is in the Anapanasati Sutta. And so we need to look at that for just a bit. In the Satipattana Sutta, it lists things in this order. One is that to recognize, to see the mind in hindrance. We see the hindrances. That's the first stage, is to recognize that the mind is in hindrance. Like, for instance, we recognize that the mind has wandered away. That wandering away is junk thoughts or in hindrance.
Is this Chitta Nupassana or Dhamma Nupassana you're talking about?
Well, this is both of those things, because it requires the Chitta Nupassana in the sense of recognizing that the content of the mind is crap. So now we're looking at both the mind and the content of the mind.
I see. Okay.
Okay. But we recognize, and that's the first thing. That in fact is the sati, that we recognize that the mind has wandered away. So that's the first step, is to recognize that the content of the mind is not what my intention was to do. That my intention through right view is not being fulfilled right now.
Mm-hmm.
The mind is hindered instead. So that's the first thing that we do with Dhammanupassana, is that we recognize whether the mind is free from hindrance or not free from hindrance. And that we want to seclude the mind from hindrance. Because by doing so, that's a job well done. That's a worthy job for us to take up, is to get the hindrances out of the mind. And that comes with a yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay moment. Aha, I'm free from that. And it also brings up the skill of one's right attitude that I can do this. Okay, so becoming free from the hindrances of the mind is the first step. The next step is to start dealing with some of the other stuff. An example of what's there is the 5 aggregates. To recognize that this, by the way, is the same as the Satipattana with a different little focus on it. That the 5 aggregates have both the body and the feeling, but the mind itself is now, instead of broken from mind and contents, into the way that the mind is structured, in the sense of memories and old ways of doing things, the Satipattana paramasa mixed up with the the parent ego state that Freud calls the superego. We can see that also as 2 other words. One is the sankharas, the old built up crap, and the other one is the Satipattana paramasa.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that the mind is just that, and consciousness and perception. And that the consciousness and perception, using all of the old memories, is what gives us our sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
But the self is not in the body. The self is not in the aggregates. The self itself is not there. But the delusion that there's a self, or the feeling that there's a self, is the result of the interplay. But consciousness itself is not a self.
Mm-hmm.
That perception itself is not the self, nor is all of the memory banks you. So you are not any of the 5 aggregates. That's actually quite liberating, to take that on as Dhammanupassana to look through, in the sense that now what you're doing is you're seeing really the temporariness of it all, because the consciousness is in and out and in and out and in and out, and perception is more like a just keep digging out of the same water pot over and over again, and that water pot is polluted. Is polluted with how your daddy treated you when you were a kid. So we recognize in general that's not me. Then we begin to look at the 4 Noble Truths, and this is where the end of it is. And in fact, this is a very interesting point, and that is that in one version of the Pali, there are 2 different suttas. One is in the Dhinga Nikaya, which is called the Maha Satipattana Sutta.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, number 22, I believe. And then Sutta number 10, the Satipattana Sutta. The main difference or distinction is the great detail that the Maha Satipattana goes into the 4 Noble Truths.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the funny part is that I don't know which is which, but in the Thai version, they are identical. I think is what they did in the Thai version is they took out the one out of the original Majjhima Nikaya and substituted the Dhinga Nikaya version in it, because it's more complete, it's longer, it's more descriptive. So that's the point. Now, you go and you look at the Anapanasati Sutta, and its Dhammanupassana is looking at it from a completely different angle, by looking at anicca, or the temporariness or the transitoriness of everything, followed then by the fading away or the rotting away of everything, including our own thoughts. That when we recognize that we're stuck in the past, then that past fades away. When we recognize what we're thinking. So when Anapanasati starts up, the old hindrances start to fade away. But we can also see that the hindrances themselves are, in fact, just turmoil in the mind. We can call it restlessness or worry or flittering around. I like to call it junk thoughts. The student came up with that, and that seems to fit really well. Because you can see that junk thoughts and spells are temporary. They just come and go and back and forth, and you'll do one, then you'll do the fourth, then you'll do number two, then you'll do four again, back to one, etc., like that. And it's just all over the map. So by doing that, we can put an end to it. And that ending, by the way, this is number 15 in the Anapanasati. How is we putting the end to it is by coming back to the object of meditation, coming back out of these hindrances, and then we let them go. Now, I've told you how to do this in microcosm or within the moment, but you can also see that this is a long process. You're going to do this over and over and over and over again, and each time you do it, it's going to take on a slightly easier to do quality to it, so that things really do begin to fade away.
Yes, and also it's slightly different depending on which tetrad you're moving through. Like the process of letting go of the hindrances when you're working with the body is slightly different to the feelings, it's slightly different to the mind.
But in each one of these tetrads, there is one of them that has the quality of understanding. Like, for instance, step number 4 in the Anapanasati is understand. Step 3, to understand the body, to experience the body. Well, guess what? Step 8 is also 7. Step 7 is also to experience the feelings, to experience, okay? It's also step number 9, to experience the mind, to look at the mind. All right, and then up at step 13 is to experience whether the mind is clouded with hindrances or whether you're thinking of something that's worthwhile thinking. So this is the point then we recognize that not only are we going to actually establish looking at the way the mind works, we're also going to start choosing what thoughts we're going to have, that we're no longer going to allow the mind to have unwholesome thoughts. That we're going to keep the mind focused on wholesome thoughts, and the examples would be the 5 aggregates, the 4 noble truths, the 8-fold noble path, not as a concept, but experiencing it right here in this present moment. Okay, so in the Anapanasati Sutta, it says that we practice the Anapanasati for the fulfillment of these 4 foundations of mindfulness. And we've already talked about what's in that sutta. But then it says that we practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness in Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana. Now, the fulfillment of the Sambhojana is in fact the 8-fold noble path as it's being fulfilled. Not that it's skill development, but it's fulfilled in the sense that the sati in the 7 factors of enlightenment is actually the sati that is unremitting. It keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. Now it's an enlightenment factor. In the beginning, it was a skill to be developed. Now it's a skill in full development and full display. And with that is the second one is unremitting investigation. You're frozen. You frozen? Come back. By George, I think we've lost him.